Welcome to another edition of Living with Purpose. Today I have Dr. Kohinoor Darda as my guest. She is a cognitive neuroscientist and she is the founder and CEO of ARISA Foundation, which is a research and social work organization that is basically connecting the bridge between arts and sciences and our well-being. By the way, she's also a scuba diver, a Bharatanatyam performer, artist, and she runs the triathlete. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Darda. Kohinoor.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor as well. Thank you so much. And we can't, as young people, compare to all the accomplishments and everything that you have achieved. So,
I always believe the people in their 30s are the ones that are going to change the world. So let's go for it.
And I'm in the right decade.
There you go. Hey, by the way, the American Constitution was the founding fathers were all in their 30s. People forget that. That huge things were actually created by people with the vigor and the clarity of thought and the power of purpose to make change. So let's talk about your journey. Where did you grow up, your family life, some of these areas that you decided to pursue, particularly neuroscience and cognitive learning. So just talk a little bit about your journey.
I grew up in Pune. We say it's a small city, but it's, 3, 4, 5, 6 million people, I think. So small-ish compared to our big cities in India. I was always good in school and, doing well in academics, but it wasn't my entire life. And I was dancing a lot. So I started dancing when I was about 4. And my grandmom was really influential in my journey of dance. So she would come to all my dance classes and I would learn Bharatanatyam and Kuchipudi. And so I started out with this very disciplined kind of training that you get in these classical dance forms when I was very, very young. And I continued with the kind of, thought process that I wanted to be a professional dancer and dance was my life and that's all I wanted to do. And actually neuroscience and, cognitive neuroscience particularly happened by accident. It's really funny. In India, when I was doing my grade 10, after that, we had to choose between arts, commerce, and science. Those were the 3 disciplines you get to choose. And I was always interested in languages, and I was really into dance at that point. And I had seen a lot of my friends and seniors go into the sciences and study physics, chemistry, biology, math. But they would all do extra classes, and their whole routines were completely blocked. From 6 a.m. in the morning to 9 p.m. at night, they were studying. I just couldn't see myself doing that, even though I really enjoyed studying. I was one of the very few people you could say who actually said, I like studying, I like exams, I was doing well at them in school. And I just said, I can't do that 24/7. And so I decided to pick arts because it seemed like a more relaxed kind of discipline to go into. That was at least my thought. But then I think the awesome thing about going into the arts was that it allowed me to explore so many other things outside of university and outside of lectures and teaching. I was still doing dance and I went and I read a lot and I was doing theater and dramas and all these extracurriculars. And I think the real learning actually came from there. And within the arts, again, in my college, I was in Ferguson College in Pune. Psychology was considered as part of the arts and not as a psychological science. And so I started learning more about philosophy and psychology, got really interested, wanted to do a double major. That wasn't a possibility back then. So I stuck with psychology. And I finished my bachelor's and, I was trying to figure out what I want to do next. And I was already dancing professionally, but I thought I needed to also explore other options along with dance. And some of my friends were applying for a master's abroad. So I said, you know what, I'm going to try, see if this works. I applied to 4 universities and I went to the university that gave me the most money, the biggest scholarship, basically. That was really the only criterion I had in my head back then. And I remember going to my dad and saying, I don't know if I want to do psychology. I don't know if I want to be a clinical psychologist. That was the route that most people took. And he said, you're investing not in your degree, but you're investing in experience. So you should just go out and get that experience. And I think, again, hands down, that was the best decision because that's where I met my master's supervisor who was doing neuroscience research. And I went into neuroscience and I had a human brain in my hand for the first time. And I remember just feeling that part of the brain which controls our digits, our fingers. And I just thought, like, what a moment. Like, I'm using fingers to touch the part of the brain that controls my fingers. That got me into neuroscience. I went on to do a PhD in that. And it just kind of happened almost automatically, I want to say. So I was always exploring many, many different options in terms of degrees. So when I applied for the PhD, I'd also applied for 4 other programs that had no, at least, from a broad level, maybe there's a relationship, but at that kind of point, I was applying for another master's in dance and choreography. I was applying for a PhD in disaster psychology, which was completely different. I was applying for a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, and I was applying for a Teach for India fellowship in India. And I said, I'll apply for 4 different things that all sound interesting to me, and I'll pick the one that takes me. And unfortunately, all 4 of them accepted me, and I said, okay, I will pick the one that sounds the most exciting at this stage, and that was the PhD in cognitive neuroscience at Bangor University in North Wales in the UK.
So let's just kind of go back again, right? I mean, you kind of briefly talked about your growing up and your dance and your grandmother and the influence that your grandmother had. Talk a little bit about your family, right? I mean, what was the family that you were growing up in? What were other influences, siblings, other extended family, and how did that shape your journey?
I'm very close to my family, my immediate family. So my parents, grandparents, and brothers, I think they're like the whole and soul of what I do. And I think I've been very, very privileged and fortunate to have parents and grandparents and brothers who are like wholly supportive of what I do and the choices I make. And I think, growing up, it was a fairly traditional Indian family environment, but also my grandparents and my parents belong to a community of Marwadis, which are really traditional and conservative, stereotypically. And my extended family is and was extremely conservative in their thought process, where girls don't really, go beyond graduation sometimes and like get married off really early. And so growing up, I've heard a lot of that narrative of after you finish your undergraduate degree, we have to find a boy for you and you're going to get married. And having a career wasn't something that was encouraged or was expected out of a girl, at least in my extended family. I think even within my family, I say this quite often to my grandparents, especially, and to my parents, especially my grandmom, who was a really influential figure in my life when I was growing up. Where even her thought process back then was like, find a career that allows you to be independent, but also allows you to focus on your family and take care of your family. So there was always this kind of idea of getting married, settling down, having kids, and being there for them. And on the side, having a career that lets you do some things, but always it was being a homemaker was the more kind of thing that was emphasized. And I did grow up with that kind of mentality, initially thinking, oh, maybe that's how my life is going to look like. But then what my dad said when I was applying for my master's, which is you're paying for the experience or you're investing in the experience, that was really true, because when I stepped out of my bubble, of my comfort zone, of my 4 walls, I met other people who had many different perspectives in life. I kind of came into my own. I started thinking about what is it that I want outside of what society expects me to do and be. And that's when I think also a lot of my ideas, my thoughts, my philosophies kind of started shaping. And the best gift that my family could have given me was supporting those and not contradicting them, or like not stopping those independent thought processes or decisions that I went on to then take, right? It would have been very easy for them to say, the extended family expects you to get married at 23 or whatever, but they didn't do that. And I think I'm lucky that they've kind of supported me and always encouraged me to be independent, and same with my brothers. So I think I grew up also seeing their journey and the support my family gave them that also gave me the confidence to kind of take decisions that were not really the norm.
Right. So if I may say so, broken lots of traditional norms.
Yeah.
So your ability to step out of that bubble gave you this new level of confidence. So as some of our younger listeners, especially women, whether they are from India or from other, there is this expectation of a role that you play and a career that you have. It's a very interesting melding that you have been able to bring together. You have tried the traditional dance form, which is primarily women, not all, because there are male dancers too in that dance form. But that's deeply rooted in tradition.
Yeah.
Then on the other side, you're actually engaged in things that are absolutely not rooted in tradition. including how you are showing up. So talk a little about that journey. How did that journey happen? So you went out, allowed you to break out, but you also had this tremendous family support that allowed you to do that, right? Otherwise, not everybody can just break out because family bonds are pretty strong. So talk a little about that journey, some of the more interesting, unconventional ways in which you are showing up with purpose. So let's just talk a little bit about that journey.
So when I went into dancing, I think it was rooted in tradition, yes, but it was also this whole community of dancers, of different women coming together and doing the dance and practicing together and all of that, right? Definitely rooted in tradition. A lot of the dance pieces, for example, show women in very stereotypical ways. And even when I was growing up, I had a lot of, I can say, problems or issues trying to be that character. And I always struggled with this very, shy, demure, damsel in distress kind of trope, even in Bharatanatyam or Kuchipudi for that matter. And I always enjoyed playing the male character. I loved being Shiva and I loved playing, I think my favorite female character was Durga, this goddess who kills demons and, is this ferocious, goddess. And I mean, how much can a 12, 13-year-old relate to a violent, demon-killing goddess? But that was the character I loved the most. That was my favorite piece, and I really felt empowered with that piece, whereas the other characters that were a bit more of a, demure, shy, damsel in distress trope, I really didn't relate to, and I really had a hard time learning those pieces as well. And I think it was somewhere there always at the back of my mind. I just didn't have an outlet or a medium to actually articulate that or express it to people around me in ways that could change my mindset, change their perceptions. As I stepped out from, again, this community, but also beyond my family and extended family, and went to a whole other, environment. It was a culture shock. It was a different country. I met a lot of people with a lot of different perspectives and mindsets. And I saw a lot of women. And I think that's where representation matters so, so much because, my postdoc supervisor, Professor Emily Cross, she is my academic mentor. She's an idol, like a role model. I saw her and I saw a whole range of other scientists who were doing amazing work and they were having these amazing careers and they were also having kids and they were, there was this whole new life kind of opened up for me and I was like, oh, this can also exist, and of course not everyone's path is my own and I would have to craft my own path and find what gives me meaning and what's the best for me. But I think that just seeing all these amazing people gave me the confidence of I can be me. And I don't have to shy away from being me just because society expects me to be a certain way. And yes, I had, again, an amazing family to support, but we had our, disagreements. It wasn't easy for my grandparents or my parents who come with their own baggage and their own learnings to accept some of the choices that I've made. But they've always been there, they've always kind of had my well-being and my happiness as their topmost priority. And I think that's really helped also for me to kind of say, okay, this is really what I want. And this is what I don't think this is for me. And I think that's kind of, now reflected in when I dance and when I choreograph still. I take all of that back into Bharatanatyam and I try to choreograph pieces that are also not traditionally rooted now in characters that I don't identify with.
So you graduated, you did your education both in the US and in the UK. You came back to India and you decided to start a foundation, a nonprofit organization. Talk a little about why that need and why going down that path. And then at the same time, trying to take an unconventional step of stepping into motherhood in a very different way. So both of these together, and why did they decide to happen simultaneously?
So I was in the US. I finished my PhD in the UK, moved to Australia after that for a postdoc, and then moved to the US for a postdoc. So I kind of moved continents quite a bit. And I came back. There were a couple of reasons. So the adoption, so I chose to be a mother and I chose adoption as my route to motherhood. And I always knew I wanted to do that. So I would always say this as a kid. I was very young, I think, when I said this for the first time. And I think everyone in my family was like, oh, well, she's young. She's going to move on. This is just something she's heard and she's saying. But I always knew that was one thing that I somehow always had a calling for, you can call it, or whatever. It was always there at the back of my mind. And I knew I wanted to adopt a baby girl. And I had already registered for it even before I'd started my postdoc, post my PhD, right? So it was a few years in the making. And I knew that she was going to come. And I was doing my postdoc in the US. There were a few family things that my dad was going through some medical stuff. So I said, okay, I'm going to come back to support my family. That was the primary reason. The second was knowing that my daughter was eventually in a few years going to come home. And I wanted to be in India to be able to then be a mother. And that's the reason I actually came back. But in my head, I was thinking, what is it that I can do that uses all the knowledge that I've gained in the last decade of doing research in my PhD and postdoc and all of that? And in my postdoc, I was doing research in this field of a relatively new kind of field, which has been around for just a few decades, called neuroaesthetics. And that's the neuroscience and psychology of arts, aesthetics, and creativity. And it was the best spot for me to be in because as a dancer, art has been something that's very close to my heart. And as someone who went into neuroscience and got interested in the science of things and in experimental methods, I kind of felt why are these two things separate? Because a lot of my learnings from dance are learnings that I can apply here. And a lot of my learnings from science are learnings I can apply in dance. And for me, they were never really separate. They were always kind of just integrated. But traditional academic institutions and systems in India didn't really offer me the kind of role or the kind of position or platform to explore this, integration, to explore this together. It was either I become a dancer or I become a neuroscientist who didn't really, who did research on dance, but there wasn't anything that brought these two things together at a more holistic level. And as I started looking at opportunities in India, I started thinking about, hey, what can I do to actually create this space for myself if I'm not finding it? And that's how that seed of a nonprofit kind of germinated. In my head, I was anyway thinking about, having something of my own, finding people who are generally considered misfits because they're a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit here and a little bit there. So, a foot in every door. And so kind of created this community, my team basically at ARISA now, who are all doing multiple things at the same time, but weren't able to fit into one or the other fully. And so we kind of became a bunch of misfits. And that's where I said, okay, I know the value of this. I know that this space doesn't exist and I want to create this space to look more holistically at well-being and at mental health, which are issues that are, quite prevalent right now in India and across the world as well. And that's how it all kind of came about. And then motherhood was always there and there was no deadline or there was no, usually I say biological mothers go through a 9-month gestation period. I had a 4 to 5 year period of waiting for my daughter to come home. And I knew it was going to happen at some point, but I didn't want to stop the work that I was doing just waiting for motherhood to happen. And so it kind of just happened that the nonprofit started and within a year, my daughter also came home. It was unplanned, but not unexpected, if I can call it that way. It worked out together. And I think it was the best time because having Isra, my daughter, home and being her mom, she's teaching me so many things that I bring to my work every single day. And I feel like the future I'm creating is also a future for her. And she's a tangible being, that adds a whole other layer of purpose to the work I do. So I think that's something that I really love that it happened all at the same time.
Yeah, this is, such a fascinating journey that you had in such a short period of time. And then again, knowing that you always were going to be a mother and adopt a daughter at a very early age. And just for our listeners, there's nothing wrong in being misfits. Misfits are the ones that actually make a huge difference in the world. So try and find your misfit that you can actually rally around. So talk a little bit, about the foundation, right? The work that you're doing, some of the exciting things that you have lined up and how you are seeing art and science come together. How should we be thinking about it?
Right. So ARISA kind of functions on 4 different pillars. I'll walk you through all of them a little bit. And all of them have this, integration of the arts and sciences. So the first pillar is what we call the research lab. And we do research within this broader domain of neuroaesthetics that I already talked about in empirical aesthetics. And essentially, what it does is try to understand how art impacts our mind and our brain. What are the changes that are happening within us because of art and because of transformative experiences that art can give us? But it's also looking at what are the brain processes that are involved while looking at art and how is the brain being engaged? And that allows us to understand a little bit about the human mind and the human brain and human cognition. And we're also working towards preserving and documenting the often undocumented stories of artists and communities because through, times immemorial, art has been a huge part of humanity. It's been there right since we existed, almost kind of in, cave paintings and tool usage have gone hand in hand. And so we're trying to document some of these stories of artists. And for example, the recent project we did was about documenting how art has contributed to the Ganesha festival in Pune, which is a big festival. But there's little to no documentation of, how the art supports this festival, how the festival supports the artists and their economies and how that kind of whole thing runs. Absolutely no documentation about the women artists in the city and the work that they've been doing and the socio-political messages and transformation that their art has also had over time and the legacy that they leave behind. So that's also something that we kind of look at within this research lab pillar of ARISA. The next pillar is the education hub. So we work towards mental health awareness and neuroscience literacy through the medium of art and experiential activities. So essentially, the idea is that art is something that's part of our day-to-day life. Like we all kind of can pick up a pen almost and draw a flower that, for some people might look like a really pretty flower. For some people might just look like something. But essentially, art, not just drawing, but like music, dance, poetry, literature, all kinds of arts, films, for example, they've been a part of our lives. And we're using them as a medium, as an intervention to then increase mental health awareness and neuroscience literacy amongst underprivileged and under-resourced communities. And we do a lot of workshops and modules. We do mental health awareness campaigns and camps across different communities and populations. We worked with students in Kashmir who've had backgrounds of trauma and violence. We worked with rural schools near Pune. And essentially the goal is mental health awareness and neuroscience literacy. And then we also work with educational institutions and colleges to talk a bit more about the importance of doing research and interdisciplinary research and how to make science more open and accessible, and also walk them through statistical methods, which is a real big gap in the Indian academic system. The third pillar is the community canvas, where we do a lot of science communication, again, primarily through the medium of art, but we also use social media. We also have a podcast, we have a blog, and we have social media videos that kind of break down these jargony concepts in language. And then the last pillar is our Creative Lab Festival, which is our annual festival. We'll be doing the third version of it next year, where we kind of bring all these elements together and people can, in real life, see tangibly what the intersection of art, psychology, and neuroscience can look like and how that can actually impact their day-to-day life. So kind of helping them get better self-awareness, body awareness, understand their own mental health, understand emotions, regulate their emotions better. So we have immersive installations, we have multisensory experiences, psychology and neuroscience games and experiments, all kinds of stuff that kind of is a part of this festival, including what we call an unconference, so like a unconventional conference where people present their art and their science and their research through unconventional ways. So people dance their research, sometimes they sing it, or, they explain it through unconventional ways. So those are the 4 kind of pillars that we work on, all towards, integrating art, psychology, neuroscience for well-being and wellness.
That is so wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing. Hopefully you're leaving a lasting change. So let's talk a little bit about purpose and why purpose is important to you and how is that driving everything that you do.
To be honest, I haven't really intentionally thought about purpose. I think the kind of philosophy I approach life with in general is I want it to surprise me. And there's this Walt Whitman quote, a part of a poem that he's written called I Have Multitudes. And I've always kind of believed that I have multitudes and I want to reach my fullest potential. And I want to create an environment that helps people achieve their full potential. And that you can define probably as by purpose. But that's something that's really kept me going across everything I've done in my personal life and my professional life, in the work that I do with ARISA and how I parent ISRA. It doesn't matter what that potential is or what that looks like. You want to get to your fullest potential, and everyone's journey will look quite different. But that's kind of what I've always believed in, that I have multitudes as well. I want to be able to experience everything possible in this life that I've been given, take all the chances that I can, basically take all the opportunities that I can to actually be able to achieve my full potential. And every year I discover that I have a little bit more than what I actually thought I had, which makes me think everything changes and like the way you view yourself changes. And I want to be able to create that environment for my daughter, for all the kids we work with, and make it into a space where there are no limits, there are no barriers to achieving your full potential, right?
I love what you just talked about in terms of multitudes. We all actually play multiple roles, and being cognizant of multitudes that we can show up in multiple ways and not just one way is really very important for all of us to focus. And you are doing a wonderful job of being a leader of a movement in some ways, a parent, a artist, a entrepreneur. And we all play that role. And having that frame of multiplicity, I think, is a wonderful way of thinking about it. So as we end, share your one golden nugget, a piece of wisdom that you live by that you would like to share with our listeners.
Just keep learning, just keep changing. I think that is key to what I've experienced and key to what I think. Just keep an open mind and keep learning new things and new perspectives. Like that really is life-changing. I can't stress that enough.
Thank you so very much, Kohinoor. It's been wonderful to have you on the podcast. Wishing you the very best in your journey in these multiple roles that you play. Again, to our listeners, purpose is that renewable source of energy that continues to drive humanity forward. Get out of your bubble, embrace multiplicity, and you will surprise yourself. Kohinoor, thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Akhtar. It was a pleasure to be here.